Uh, I'm here to ask you to vote for Jim Cook in this category. He was well known, I think, by everybody, most everybody, as a rodeo announcer, but he also had a vast experience in the ranching and livestock business. His grandfather was a horseman and raised a lot of horses. When he was 5 years old, he helped gather wild range horses and trail them home. He also operated a auction market in Winchester, Virginia, and knew people down there. He had a ranch out between Glendive and Weebo and operated that with his brother. And he also had bought and sold livestock, so he's had an experience. He has a knowledge when he announces a rodeo. He has quite a knowledge of what people go through. So I'd appreciate a vote for Jim for that category. Thank you.
My name is Sally Aber. My husband was Bob Aber, who is in the Hall of Fame. I'm here to speak in behalf of Jim Cook. Jim was a personal friend as well as our go-to announcer. Bob had the contract for the Valley City Winter Show for 38 years, and Jim was the announcer for 18 to 20 some years of that. To be a good announcer, one must have a good speaking voice, and that Jim was gifted with. Everyone that heard Jim speak, whether it was for an auction sale or whether it was for a rodeo, always said he had one of the best speaking voices. And he did. He was gifted. Besides having a good voice, he must have a great deal of knowledge about rodeo, about its contestants, who they are, where they came from, what event they were in, and where did they stand in the rodeo standings. These were all things that people were interested in knowing. It took a lot of preparation before and after a rodeo. Jim was prepared each and every time. He also was very good at keeping the audience interest and occupied during lapses of any event. This is very important because, as anyone knows about rodeo, can be a lot of interference in between events. Jim had a personality to meet and converse with anyone. He was well thought of. Bob had many other rodeos year after year, and Jim was the announcer for most all of them. He is well deserving to have been nominated. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Fran Armstrong, and Steve over here just looked at my pages, and he said, "Are you going to read all that?" But you see, I was a teacher for 40 years, and I know what it's like when it gets to be about 2:30 in the afternoon, and the kids get that glazed look on their face. I see it all over this room. So I'm here to say a few words, and as Dean would have said, my speech will not be very long, but it would be very good. And this is how it is. Jim was among the first people that I met when I began coming out to the Badlands. The Cooks and the Abernathys were old friends of Dean's, and they immediately made me one of the family, so to speak. Actually, I knew Jim before I met any of the others because he announced at rodeos where I ran barrels. He never made fun of my Appy horse because of his hairlessness. No mane and no tail. Some of the announcers did. So I really appreciated Jim. When I think of Jim, like Sally said, I think of that resonant announcer's voice that he had. He always made a person sound good, just the way he spoke. He was always a promoter of rodeo and the rodeo way of life, but he promoted us as individuals, too. When I first published my book, My Heroes Have Always Been Cowboys, he and Laura Griffin were probably my best marketers. They always had a copy of that book somewhere and talked it up. and I credit him to a lot of the success that I had with it. He always tried to be at all the cowboy poetry gatherings, and if he wasn't there, you felt like something was really missing. He was generous in many ways. Since he was an auctioneer, he found all sorts of things that might be fun for someone else to have. And I was sometimes the recipient of some of his generosity. There are some big wheels that I have at the entrance to the ranch. Those were wheels that he brought out at some time or other. He was a kind man, and so far as I know, he just never spoke badly of anyone. He knew everybody, and I expect that he knew a lot about a lot of people that he never said. Besides being a cowboy from the old school and having grown up, like Rex always says, Jim was riding and trailing cows when he was 8 years old. He was a great promoter of the cowboy image and culture. He was a good friend to many of us, and he should be inducted into the Cowboy Hall of Fame. I just wish he had lived to know that he was being inducted. So I really appreciate your vote for him, and thank you for your time.
I'd like to read a letter that my brother Jim Thompson, who's a PRCA rodeo announcer and definitely a good friend of Jim Cook, and my brother Jim could not be here tonight or today, so here's what he writes. Jim Cook properly defines the Hall of Fame in North Dakota. He was born in Beach in 1935, graduated from high school in Sentinel Butte, attended college at Dickinson State with an ag degree. His first big win in the arena was at Medora in 1950, where he won both the bareback riding and the cow riding. His favorite moment as a contestant is being runner-up in the Wolf Point Stampede in the bull riding in 1965. His last bull ride was in Sidney, Montana in 1968. His voice caught attention even as a young man, and so he became an announcer. His break-in period was to announce a bi-weekly rodeo in Leesburg, Virginia for Jim Shoulders in 1964, while traveling back to North Dakota to keep competing with the likes of Jim Fisher, Bob and Don Aber, and Merle Van Horn. During over 50 years of announcing, he worked for the likes of Marvin Brookman, Sonny Linger, Bob Aber, Bob Barnes, Jim Sutton, and Jim Corco. He announced the Valley City Rodeo for 18 years. He also announced the 4th of July Rough Rider Days Rodeo in Dickinson for 18 years. But his favorite was the Match of Champions, which he also lists as his biggest accomplishment as an announcer for the better part of 2 decades. If he had a hero in rodeo, it had to be Jim, Tom Tesher, and Elvin Nelson. He recalls, they were always treated me right and with respect. The best cowboy he had the privilege of announcing? Well, that's a tough one, he said, but there are 2 that come to my mind, Paul Tierney and Tom Miller. He admired their ability to work and succeed at both ends of the arena. Jim Cook excelled as a contestant and as an announcer. He truly defines the makeup of a man who deserves to be enshrined in the North Dakota Cowboy Hall of Fame. Submitted by Jim Thompson.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tyler Cook. I'm Jim's son. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everybody to speak on Jim's behalf. We're getting kind of towards the drag of this. I'd like to take the opportunity to North Dakota Cowboy Hall of Fame. As always, a very deserving nominational class in all categories. I think everybody should give everybody a round of applause. They're just tremendous. To me, Jim seemed to know everyone, everywhere, and just seemed to know something about him. And so there was always a little history, kind of 3 things I remember. There's always a history and a story and a life lesson learned. You know, whether we were out in Twin Buttes or Wanigan or Bell Lake We were going by an old set of buildings, a set of corrals, certain pasture, certain draw. There was always a story about something, about gathering cattle or feeding cattle or having a wreck. Or if we were in a town, whether it was Sentinel Butte or whether it was Medora or whether it was at Dickinson, there always was a story. And it was always a positive story about somebody or someone. Rodeo, Jim was a contestant first when he was young and went to announcing later on. Jim announced for 30 plus years, gold card member, RCA. He announced North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming. His younger days on the East Coast, New Jersey for Howard Harris, Jim Shoulders in Virginia, PRCA, RCA, college, high school, Little Britches, local play days. Again, he knew countless people. The contestants, committee members, contractors, people behind the scenes getting the jobs done. He always visited and talked with everybody. His true interest was always in them, I believe. That's what I saw. To know them, to know what was new with them, whether they'd gotten married, if they'd had children, where they'd been, if they'd been traveling, they showed up late, and where they'd been, or so on and so forth. As an announcer, it was important to him to make sure every contestant received their due, whether they were world champ, whether they were local mutton buster. He always knew something about them, and he wanted to tell everybody about them, tell the spectators. Whether Jim was announcing a rodeo, selling an auction, whether that auction was cattle, farm and ranch, pie social, or emceeing a community event or benefit for an individual, which he did countless times. He loved to do it. At the end of the day, that was his true love. Jim loved people. Jim loved everybody. He loved to visit with them. He loved to talk with them and see what was going on. Throughout his life, he was very positive and very proud of his Western heritage and culture, the ranching and rodeo way of life, and he tried to demonstrate that to his friends and his family. A couple of the last things that Jim and I talked about was Jim told me he's really blessed. He said, I was born in the right time, the right place, surrounded by the right people to grow up. You could never get any better. And friends and family, that's what's most important. He never complained. A couple weeks before he passed away, we could tell he didn't feel good. And we kept asking him. He said, I'm all right. Finally, we said, you got to go to the doctor. He said, I'll go to the doctor, but I'm not going to go to the doctor till after the buck and horse sale. Because I want to go to the buck and horse sale because there's some people I'm going to see there and visit with, and I'm going to see some good Bronx buck. So with that, I'd like to thank you and your consideration for Jim and the North Dakota Cowboy Hall of Fame. Thank you.